They were made by the great smiths and forges around the lands for the kings and warriors of the dwarves, elves, and men alike. They earned reputation through great deeds and battles to be both passed down and remembered in history. Some were feared and even revered through the lands of Arda. Some made for good, but retaining evil. Some even made out of meteorite that had fallen from the stars above. What's up, everybody? Today on the Petty Lords, we are going to dive into some of the famous swords and blades from the many diverse lands of Arda. If you are liking the lore and enjoying the videos on the channel, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for many more location breakdowns, character breakdowns, and wonderful stories from the great world of Arda. On a note up front, there are many great weapons across the lands. Axes, bows, spears, maces, etc. But today, we are going to focus on the swords and blades. And we will cover other famous weapons in future videos here on the channel. So, where to start? It's a great question. So, we think we will shoot to start in the First Age and move forward from there. In the First Age, King Thingol ruled the land of Doriath, ruling from the capital of Menegroth. He had his kingly sword named Arven-Ruth, meaning King's Ire in the Sindering language. This was a magnificent long sword with a black handle and a green jewel affixed to the hilt, and a beautiful blade for hand-to-hand combat. While made in the First Age, it would last far into the Second through both Thingol's family and through the Númenórean lines. In 506 of the First Age, 4 years after King Thingol's death at the hands of the dwarves, the sword is saved by Elwine, wife of Eärendil the Mariner, and gifted to her son Elros, the brother of Elrond. Elros would use it as the first king of Númenor, and it would pass through the line of kings until the island nation's demise in the Second Age, and the blade is claimed by the sea. Next, we will tell of two of the oddest and most mysterious blades in the First Age of the world, Anduril and Anduril. Eöl, known as the Dark Elf, comes across a strange meteorite, and it's from this meteorite he forges these two black blades. They were two long swords with glowing black leaf-shade blades, with upturned hilts and large pommels to help for stability while wielding them, and both could easily slice through iron. When Eöl and his family dwell in the forest of Nan Elmoth outside the kingdom of Doriath with King Thingol's permission, in return for letting him dwell in his realm, Eöl gifts Thingol Anduril, but the king prefers his own sword, Arven-Ruth, which we just covered, and places Anduril in his armory. After receiving this sword, the king's wife, who was a Maya, Queen Melion, would tell the king that the malice of the Maker dwells in the black blade and warns him of its use. Its brother blade, Anduril, which meant Iron of the Eternal Star, would remain with its maker Eöl until it is stolen from Eöl's son Maeglin and presumably taken with him to the hidden city of Gondolin. What happens to Anduril next, we never do truly find out. Anduril, meaning flaming iron, would one day come to the elf Beleg's strongbow. When Beleg is tasked with finding Turin Turambar, Beleg asks for the blade from King Thingol, and the king gifts it to him. Soon after, Beleg finds Turin after he is captured by orcs. Beleg then rescues Turin from the orcs, and when Beleg goes to cut Turin's bonds, he pricks Turin with the blade. Turin Turambar flies into a rage, thinking the orcs have come back to torture him. He wrestles the blade from Beleg, and he slays his friend with the black blade. After the slaying, the blade's edges became dull, and it stopped to glow. Turin takes the sword and makes his way to Nargothrond, and has the elven smiths reforge the sword and renames it Gorthing, Iron of Death. Turin would carry this blade through his entire life, and the hero even uses it to kill Glaurung, father of all dragons. But after a life of events gone awry, Turin turns to Gorthing to end his own life. He asks the blade if it will slay him swiftly, in which a dull voice comes from the blade and answers,
"Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly." that so I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandia slain unjustly, I will slay thy swiftly.
Turin then falls onto the blade, ending his life, and with this event, Anglakel, that was renamed Gorthane, shatters upon Turin's death and is buried with him, never to see the world again. Now, why not a whole lot of information is available on this blade? We definitely need to mention it, as it was a wonderful weapon, and the great sword that wounded the Dark Lord Morgoth 7 times from its user. At the time, the High King of the Noldor, Fingolfin, in the First Age, would challenge Morgoth to single combat, and he would wield his great blade. Its name was Ringil, derived from the word ring, meaning cold, a long sword with a skinny shaft used to parry and counter attacks, but with a bulged tip used to disarm and de-shield an enemy. It was made of a shining steel and glittered in the light, with an upswept guard, a blue-wrapped handle, and a silver pommel. The sword would accompany the king to his last fight, and was said to glitter in the light like an icicle in the dark. The wounds from this sword would plague Morgoth for the rest of his days, as it is said that the Dark Lord would walk with a limp after the injuries received from Ringil, and the sword would go down with its king after its fall. Moving to another area of the land, we come across the land of the horsemen, Rohan. The sword of Theoden king was called Hadagrim, meaning very fierce or cruel, also meaning savage. This was a thicker broadsword with multiple fillers to lighten the blade, a wrapped brown leather handle with a gold pommel, and the guard was golden and in the shape of 2 horses forming a heart. The sword he used in the Battle of Pelennor Fields to take down the Southron chieftain. His nephew, Eomer king, would wield Guthwina, meaning battle friend. Guthwina was built in very similar fashion to Hadagrim, a broadsword with deep fullers to lighten the blade, a leather-wrapped handle, and a golden pommel and golden guard. These 2 blades would accompany these great kings in the War of the Ring in the Third Age, and would go on to do great deeds. Hadagrim would fall with its king during the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and later be buried with Theoden king upon his death at the hands of the Witch King. And Eomer king's sword, Guthwina, would accompany him through many battles in the late Third Age and into the Fourth Age, and later be buried with him upon his death in the early Fourth Age. Next, we move on to an evil blade, the dreaded Morgul blade, accompanied the Witch King, the leader of the Nazgul, through the terrible deeds he committed throughout the years. This was a cruel blade, a long iron broadsword suited for mounted combat or on foot. This long broadsword was paired with a downward swept guard to protect the hand and deflect oncoming strikes, and a silver spiked pommel for balance. While many deeds were done with this blade, the most notable use of this blade was when the Witch King stabbed the hobbit Frodo Baggins on Weathertop in the Nazgul ambush upon the Ringbearer. This blade also held a magic to bring its victim into the dark wraith world where the race themselves dwelt, the magic being so powerful that every anniversary of the attack, Frodo would fall ill on the day until he sails to Valinor to live out his days. Now we move on to what we would call the 4 big dogs of the bunch: Glamdring, Orcrist, Narsil, and Sting. These 4 blades probably the most famous of them all. Let's start with Narsil, later to be known as Anduril, the Flame of the West, the grey blade of the kings of men. Narsil, meaning red or white flame, was rumored to be created by the great dwarf smith Telkar in the First Age in the dwarven realm of Nogrod in Beleriand. While nothing is known of it during the First Age, in the Second Age, the sword comes to the first king of Arnor, Elendil. It was a long broadsword, looking almost like a Scottish claymore, great for clearing groups of enemies. It had a long silver cross guard for deflection and catching weapons swung, a black wrapped handle, and an ornate rounded pommel to balance this beast of a sword. Elendil uses the sword in the Battle of Dagorlad and the Siege of Barad-dûr, and then uses it in his fight with Sauron himself, when Elendil and the High King Gil-galad take down the Dark Lord at the cost of their own lives. After the battle, the blade breaks, and the king's son Isildur takes up the hilt shard of Narsil and cuts the One Ring from Sauron's hand, ending the War of the Last Alliance. Isildur attempts to take the sword back to Arnor, but is killed along the way. His squire, Otar, saves the blade and brings it to Rivendell. There it would sit for many years until Aragorn, Isildur's heir, would come to be. The sword is then reforged and given to Aragorn. He then renames it Anduril, Flame of the West, and would wield the blade for the rest of his days as the king of the reunited kingdom and a great hero throughout the lands. Now, Glamdring, Orcrist, and Sting we will cover as a set, although used by different characters. All three of these elvish blades were forged in the city of Gondolin in the First Age, and all three were known to glow blue when orcs or goblins were nearby. Glamdring, meaning the foe hammer or beater to the orcs, was the primary of the bunch and was wielded by the king of Gondolin, Turgon himself. This was a long sword built very much like Narsil, had a crossguard, a blue wrapped handle, and a silver pommel. After the sinking of Beleriand in the First Age, whether by travel or robbery, it made its way to Middle-earth along with its mate Orcrist and a dagger, later to be known as Sting. The trio is found in a troll horde by Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield and company. Thorin takes Orcrist, Bilbo is given the dagger, and Gandalf takes Glamdring for himself. Glamdring would accompany Gandalf through the rest of his life in Middle-earth, all the way to the Battle of the Morannon at the Black Gate. After his time in Middle-earth, the blade would return with Gandalf back to his home in Valinor. Orcrist, meaning goblin cleaver or biter to the orcs, was the mate to Glamdring. This was a shorter sword with a half-leaf tip slimming down towards the guard, a one-pronged guard used to catch oncoming blows, a wooden handle, and a spiked pommel used to break helmets and bones alike. This sword would be used by Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, in his quest to reclaim his homeland of Erebor. The blade was taken from him upon his imprisonment by the Elves of Mirkwood, but after his death in the Battle of Five Armies, Thranduil, king of the Elves of Mirkwood, lays the sword upon Thorin's tomb in the Lonely Mountain. The blade would glow then blue when enemies neared the Mountain Kingdom, alerting the dwarves of the threat, and there it lied for years to come. At last we come to the dagger that was found along with Glamdring and Orcrist in the Troll Horde, and given to Bilbo Baggins by Gandalf. It was a short silver blade with a small guard and a black and silver wrapped handle, and a small silver pommel. The dagger went with Bilbo through his adventures to reclaim Erebor, and went back to the Shire with him. After his travels, Bilbo then gives the blade to Frodo for his adventures. Frodo would use this blade through the War of the Ring, and also return to the Shire with it before leaving for Valinor. Frodo then gifts the blade, now named Sting, to his friend Samwise Gamgee, who would keep it till the end of his days. Thank you guys so much for watching the famous Swords of Arda. We hope you enjoyed the video and continue to enjoy the content on the channel. If you enjoyed the lore of Arda, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for even more from this wonderful world of Tolkien. We are in the works of something special. Again, thank you guys so much for watching and subscribing. And remember folks, we are not runic emperors, just the petty lords.